So, Michael, tell me about your first meeting with Bacon.
Well, the only half-dozen occasions on which our paths crossed were all either in the Colony Room Club in its Dean Street days and or on the street below. And an art dealer and connoisseur called Barry Miller, who I drank with more in the French pub. I was living in Greek Street at the time. Suggested we go up there after the French closed. Said, "Oh, like all sorts of poets will be there in their cups. I'm sure they'll love you." He took me up this dark, dank staircase and through a sort of mysterious door, as you might find in the grotty green room of a dilapidated theatre, and through the door open, there was this kind of reptilian creature on a high stool who shouted the words, "Hello again, cunty, what cunt have you brought in now?" And he said, "Who's Michael Horovitz, a great poet? Should be credit to the guy." "Yeah, you'll be banned soon, Barry, bringing in every bit of rubbish." And I was somewhat taken aback. I said, "Oh, thanks for the welcome," or something. And she sort of spat. And he started introducing me to people. And one of them was Francis, who glanced at me, was surrounded by acolytes. I mean, the Colony Room was such a kind of festival of back-scratching of people from when they were stone-cold sober to when they were hopelessly pissed. And if they'd see any celebrity or person they wanted to claim affinities with, there would be hugging followed by backstabbing. And it was clear that Francis was the uncontested king of this Colony Room castle, and he sort of beamed when Barry came towards him and beamed again when he was introducing yet another, as I thought of it, lump of human or not so human meat, because my acquaintance with Francis Bacon's name and work was one exhibition when, in my first year at Oxford, about 3 years before, there was a Bacon exhibition in the then Hanover Gallery, I think Hanover Street, and I'd never heard of or seen Bacon's work. I remember some of them were very dark, either black and white or black and grey or black, and just images of torture and imprisonment and desperation. And I was quite frightened. And a part of me didn't want to look. Like, I'm quite a squeamish person, I think. So I was surprised, having brooded on this and then looked up some of Bacon's images in books and so forth and catalogues. I thought this must be such a morbid, miserable soul. And then here was this kind of very amiable, bright-eyed pisshead wanting to have a half-drunk, sentimental conversation, because I offered him what I'd just produced, the first issue of my magazine series, New Departures, and the minute he saw that, he said, "Oh, William Burroughs! How wonderful! Burroughs! I drank with him in Dean's Bar, Tangier, and we struck up such a friendship. How very nice! And did you know him?" I said, "Yeah, sure. We became friends when he was in the Beat Hotel in Paris, and these were, in fact, the first excerpts from Burroughs's, some people consider it his magnum opus, Naked Lunch, to be published in Europe, so which sort of got me into trouble."
Did Bacon talk about Burroughs' work at all?
Yes, he felt there was an affinity between them, and he felt when they'd talked in Tangier, they'd covered some proper aesthetic grounds. And in a way, the vision, insofar as you can speak of William Burroughs' vision, it's very dystopian. And on the surface, if you compare it to Samuel Beckett's vision, Beckett was more outspoken. I mean, they both overlap. I think Bacon liked reading and what he knew of both of those men's writings, probably a lot more than he did of much other literature. And the interesting thing is Bacon's art has, to my mind, I've been rereading before this interview different opinions and critiques and commentaries on Bacon's work, and some of them accurately, historically, probably point to Francis's sojourn in Paris, I think, in the post-war years, where he fell heavily, I'm told, and see on a few reproductions, fell under the influence of Léger, with those very metallic, tubular, later Bacon-like, almost constructivist, mechanical images. And somewhere I noted it had been documented that Bacon's first reading in Paris was the Jean-Paul Sartre Being and Nothingness. And Bacon certainly waxed eloquent about nothingness over and over. There was a televised interview with Melvyn Bragg, both of them well oiled, and then oiling more, with endless refills of champagne over their grilled bream or whatever it was. And I remember them becoming more and more incoherent. And he would say, "Oh, Francis, what is your philosophy of art and humanity?" And Francis, "Well, Melvyn, it's nothing. I'm optimistic about nothing." And if you just look at those words and think this is the final great words of a great artist, it looks very banal and what might get into Seward's corner. Because anyway, if you think of the works of Samuel Beckett and philosophers like Schopenhauer, and there's a quotation, "Nothing is more real than nothing." So Bacon seemed to want to encompass all that and to demonstrate the difference between visual art and language. I mean, all these names I've cited from literature, and indeed the whole matter of naming somehow gets vaulted over by visual art and by music in many cases, whereas literature plods along. And Burroughs famously kept saying, William Burroughs, literature is 50 years behind painting and music. We have to catch up. And he did these cut-ups later, which upset Beckett at a famous dinner. Maurice Giraudy, L'Impré Press publisher, arranged between Burroughs and Beckett. Monsieur Beckett, Monsieur Burroughs, you are the great pioneer writers, and Mr. Burroughs will explain to you his cut-up technique. Cut-up? Beckett said, cut-up? What? He said, I'm simply rearranging words, your words too, along with New York Times and Herald Tribune and Kafka and Homer, and throw them in. Like Tristan Tzara did this, and then I take what comes out and paste it together with different... Paul said, but you're using other people's words. Please keep me out of this. And he was absolutely upset and wanting to leave, and Giraudy said, that's not writing, that's plumbing. And of course, to some extent, plumbing, all the complications of what a plumber has to learn, were the sorts of activity a lot of modernist art in every medium was approximating to. And what I liked gradually in Bacon, and getting over the sort of horrified at his expose of the horrors of human existence, is that he was so authentic.
And tell me if you can remember any other actual occasions of meeting Bacon or having conversations.
Well, they were all in the Colony Room. I had a love-hate relationship with the Colony Room, because a lot of the philosophy of the Colony Room and the French pub and the whole Bohemian would-be elite society of outsiders, misfits, unanimous, I didn't like, because the sort of competitive capitalism they purported to be objecting to, revolting against, was actually, it so often happens that the competitiveness of people to be, that Bacon was famously quoted forever, champagne for my real friends, real pain for my sham friends. And about half the colony room was constantly wanting to have the champagne and not be subject. I mean, when Francis got very drunk, which I saw once or twice, he could be as bitchy as anybody. And so almost real pain was being inflicted. This set the example for the people often in the whole world of the arts, I'm sure you're as aware of just hopeless competitiveness, because in the pyramid there's only room for a few glittering stars near the top, and all the pathetic downtrodden ants creating the base of the pyramid are all out to murder each other. So that aspect I didn't like, all the bitching. I suppose partly I felt potentially to become subject to it. In the same way, verbally, I fought daggers with anyone who tried to smart-ass me and show that I ought to, as Muriel Belcher had opined on several occasions, be banned and get the fuck out of my nest. So all of that I found very painful. I was then and still now clinging to the sense that artists and writers really need to aspire to be bringing something better into the universe, not imitating all its worst habits, let alone the vices and horribleness of things like the nuclear bombing of the Japanese cities and its equivalent.
And I was going to ask you, which of Bacon's paintings would you keep?
None. I sell them all to the highest bidder. No, I mean, one aspect that occurs in response to that question is that the pictures of Francis, as I've seen physically, the originals, is precious few. And that precious few, each one, of course, is highly individual, probably in every detail different, but they fall into very... well, unless that reflects the superficiality of my knowledge of his oeuvre, they seem to fall into early work influenced by Léger, utterly different from what followed. The period where he gradually was exposed to and articulated the horrors of the 20th century, from all sorts of early photographic and documentary records through the Holocaust and the dropping of the atom bombs and the continuing vicious mass murders continuing through his lifetime, coupled with a celebration of every aspect of physical life from mainly a pretty jaundice-eyed standpoint. So you don't get a lot of lyricism or whimsy or good humour, which seemed to trip from his tongue and spirit when you met him in person. The first thing that struck me was that this man is so cheery and seemingly happy. Perhaps the colony room was the place or a place where he could just utterly relax. He's one of the beacons of my lifetime, it seems to me, who reminds me anyway, when I think of and see his images, however wondrous and inspired and appreciative of having been born to this great vale of tears, everything is transient. So he's another example of someone who put into his works no great message of salvation or redemption, but nevertheless a reminder of the power of art, of image making, of colour and rhythm and concern with doing something authentic that could strengthen us in bearing all the terribleness humans inflict on each other and themselves. So Francis was simply laying down as best he could what he saw and how he saw it.
Well, Francis was saying that he often had an ambition to create the perfect picture. This was his aim. But he also said that he didn't want to, because once he'd done that, he would never need to paint again. He liked painting.
That's so nicely put. Well, it reminds me of this poem which says something comparable about writing. Sisyphon, thinking of the myth of Sisyphus. I dreamed I'd written down the dream straight off, in its pure dream mode, untranslatable to man, and so was safe from any scheme to amplify, thus cloud what it might mean, to no avail. For when I woke, at first serene, but then, alas, the dream was nowhere to be seen, no trace, beyond my certainty that in it I'd conceived the poem I was born for, lost now, indifferent as death to breath, to how each night, each day, words fail.